Everybody, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us at the first Indie List, awful name, Learn Over Lunch Session, LOL. Anyway, I'm sure we'll come up with a better one. There's better copywriters than us that will come up with a much better title than that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Peter McPartlin. The lovely Una Hurley there is on the bottom left of the screen. Hopefully you can see Una as well. And I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us today. Una and I are hoping that this will be one of, I suppose, a number of these type of sessions. We've had people asking us to do a couple of teach-ins, for want of a better description, and we're very lucky today to be joined by two people who've spent most of their careers running or working in agencies in this country. And from my experience of working with both of them and knowing both of them, they're well placed to advise on our topic today, which is how to get hired by agencies, how to hopefully get hired again, and just as importantly, how to value your work, your output, and your time with agencies. Gary Brown is the former chair and founder of Target McConnell's, now Folk Wonderman Thompson. He has run successful award-winning agencies for over 30 years. He's a former board member of Board Bia and Board Nagan, and has worked on some of the major brands in the country, and also advised some government ministers along the way. Clearly, some of them are not listening to his advice, but anyway, as well as being an astute marketeer and entrepreneur, he also has a great reputation for creativity, for commerce, and certainly in my experience of speaking a lot of common sense. Gary, Conas too.
Come on, Peter, thanks very much.
Good. Welcome to the show.
Of all the introductions I've ever had, that's the most recent.
Thanks. Anyway, Alan Kiernan is a 30-year veteran of the ad industry. He said veteran, we didn't say veteran, but anyway, he is an absolute legend as far as the ad industry is concerned. And in his own words, is a one-club player, having spent all that time with Irish International BBDO, the last 20 years of which was at board and CFO level. And now he works across the industry as a freelance finance man, helping agencies and service providers and independent contractors, like many who are on the call today, to navigate their way through the COVID crisis and beyond. Alan, how are you doing?
Very good, Peter. Delighted to be here.
Good. From downtown Clontarf, yeah?
Downtown Hopes for me. We're both Northsiders with good representation here today, Peter.
Hopes is really part of the south side that kind of drifted over to the north side, and you should know that, yeah.
Well, maybe.
Anyway, you're all very welcome, and thank you guys for volunteering to do the session today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping things for the people who are on the call today. Clearly, I can't see you. Hopefully, you can see us. My broadband, to be honest, I live in downtown Phibsborough, and it is ropey at the best of times. And we have close to, what is it now, just over 50 people on the call. Can I ask each of you, obviously, most of you, I think you're on mute, and I can't see the video feed, so that's great. That just plays havoc with the bandwidth. If for whatever reason you get cut off from the session, just click back on the link and you should get back in again. Or if I get clicked off, then Una will take over. And the good news is that we'll record it so that you can watch it back at a later date if you so wish. We have about 40 minutes planned to cover the interview with Gary and Alan. Plenty of time for questions, so please post your questions in the chat box along the way, and both Una and I will do our best to get to all of the questions and put them to the lads. By the way, it's a conversational session, so I'm going to apologize in advance for any inadvertent swearing that might go on. I think we're all over 18 on the call, so any young ears that might be in your little Zoom room, you might want to send them off to watch Father Ted or something like that, whatever's on at lunchtime. Anyway, let me kick off. Despite all of the current doom and gloom around the economic performance of Ireland, although the tax figures in the last 24 hours sounds as if they're good, certainly what Una and I have seen over certainly the beginning of the year, there's been a demand for talent, both full-time and project-related talent across agencies, but also clients. And particularly from client companies. It's certainly something that we've experienced from when we started back in on the 4th of January. And, you know, we've been talking to a lot of agencies this year, PR agencies, ad agencies, media agencies, and so on. And judging by things like LinkedIn and job sites, there is a demand that we certainly haven't seen in the 7 months that we started the Indie List. Gary, I might just ask you to kick off. You know, what's your view on this kind of what seems like a sudden upsurge in hiring and demand for talent in the middle still of a pandemic?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because myself, even in the last 3 to 4 weeks, I've had a large request to do various presentations to groups of people. And in fact, in the last 4 weeks, I think I've spoken to Drug Rehabilitation Institute. I've spoken to a group from Gamblers Anonymous, and I've spoken to a large group from the Alcoholics Anonymous. So if anyone has heard my presentation before out there, I apologise. But also, I was asked to speak to the Irish Association of Hemorrhoid Sufferers, where I got a standing ovation. Now, you want to be very careful standing up at Zoom meetings, so be very careful. No, but seriously, I believe there's a function of, there's two things going on here. One, traditionally in advertising, around the first week in January was usually when you tended to let people go who weren't performing the previous year. You kind of never really gave them the Spanish Archer the week coming up to Christmas because nobody wanted to do that. So a few people are being filtered out in early January. That's usually what goes on. And then, of course, that then moves on to people being recruited in their place. So there's probably a bit of that happening, Peter, I'd say. But I do believe there is hope. Hope is in the air. You know, as he said in True Grit, hope is in the air and help is on the way. That should be the indie sessions watchword. So I do believe people are beginning to plan for this year. Spending last year across Europe was down. Advertising spend was down about 10 to 11%, with Germany 9%, France 12%, and in the States it was 15%. So you know, that's not too bad considering what has happened. I think the fact that the vaccine will be coming down the road has given us all a little bit of hope. And I think people are beginning to plan for the future, not just agencies. I think brands and companies in general. Now, the great thing about talking about the future is no one can contradict you. So I'm going to predict that it's going to be okay in the next while. I actually think that it's a really good place for freelancers to be. Would be very optimistic of the freelance market certainly in the next 6 to 9 months, possibly a year. Because people will be looking at how there's something coming in advertising business. The model needs to change, and people are looking at that. We've all known that for a long time. The pandemic will probably be the catalyst in helping to do that. But I do think it's a good place to be right now, being a freelancer, and I would be hopeful.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Alan. I mean, Alan, you've been through various peaks and troughs in the industry over the course of the 20, 30 years that you've been there. And clearly you're dealing with agencies, you're dealing with clients, you're talking to freelance people and so on. What is it, a kind of a cautious air of optimism? Is it calm before the storm? Is it going to call change when pandemic payments kind of dry up and so on?
I think in the early stage of this, there was a definite sense that people were kind of hanging on to staff because there was a strong subsidy culture there from government, and it was very much in the government's intentions to keep people in work. And as that's moved through the different transitions, there was the TWS and EWSS. That's coming to an end at the middle of the year. And as it happens, you know, the government may be credited for getting this right, their timing right, because maybe by the middle of the year with the uptake of vaccines, that things will be better. And you referenced there the tax numbers that came out. I mean, if you said to somebody that our income tax for 2020 would be down 1% on the previous year with $500,000 on the PUP, you know, you'd wonder where you're getting your figures from. But again, a lot of the low paid people don't pay an awful lot of tax in this country. So that balances out. But where I think it's going to change, is there change ahead? I'd agree wholeheartedly with Gary. I think what agencies have done over the last number of months is kind of a little bit of self-reflection, looking at their setup, particularly with remote working and people out of the office and how they utilize their staff. And I think there's going to be, it may not be, you know, a revolution, but there will be an evolution of what an agency looks like. And that's likely to be, and what even agencies are saying or committing to, is maybe a tighter core and then more access to freelance. So whereas freelance may traditionally have been used as filling a gap because somebody's gone on maternity or is out sick, or there's a couple of new business or, pieces of business that came in at the same time that they need to service. I think it's going to change that model to, rather than I need them now, to more a kind of a la carte basis. So I'm going to bring people in as my business needs it, of different shapes and different skill sets. And one of the things that is kind of become clear, you see a business like Core, which was a media agency in it. It's back. It's gone full circle. It's back to being a creative shop, and PR companies and the wider, like, the advertising industry, or the agencies within it, has got so broad now, and people are trying to be experts in all these different disciplines. I think it'll lend itself to that bespoke market, where you bring people in not because you're particularly busy or you've got a gap. It's because they've got a particular skill set that you can hire on a bespoke basis. I think that's the kind of what's going to happen post.
So some of and we've a range of, just looking at the names of the people who are on the call here today, we've a range of different people, some of whom clearly generate their own income through their own direct contacts, previous clients that they've worked for. Some of them are dependent on agencies. And I know, certainly myself and Una's experience of talking to people who've been freelancing for some time, that they're wondering why they're not getting the jobs that they feel that they're qualified for. They have, maybe in some cases, have a degree for, good technical skills, a decent portfolio, essentially everything that they thought they would need to get the great job in their field. And I'm just wondering, from both of your points of view, just your own perspective on it, do you think that there's maybe a skills gap now, that the agencies have this expectation of what people need to get employed? Because the traditional areas of freelancing, as we all know, as people who've hired freelance people when we're on the agency side, it tends to be advertising, creativity, but now the demands are a lot more than that. And it's not to say that people like copywriters and art directors and so on are not in demand. They are, and we know that from some of the placements that we've done. But do you think that there is a skills gap that agencies need to fill, and that clients are demanding more and more from their agencies, and that maybe freelancers need to kind of use that awful word pivot and start looking at ways in which they can upskill in certain areas? Gary, I might ask you to come in on that.
Well, I think a lot of first of all, we're advertising agencies are in the business of creativity, but in terms of their business models and how they work, they're probably the least creative business in the world. I mean, they don't tend to be really, they don't really tend to push innovation. Innovation is obviously very, very often pushed upon them by clients' demands. And I think what's happening in lots of cases, brands and clients are actually saying to agencies, have you not got this? Have you not got that? Why haven't you got this? Why haven't you got that? And as I said, there's lots of new skill sets, and I've been talking about them the other day, brand architects and Flash developers. And I thought Sean Dunn was a Flash developer, but seemingly there's lots of things going on within the business that requires Flash developers. And I think certainly from the digital point of view and the technology, the whole technology gambit that's been thrown across agencies, has forced agencies to rethink about what they need to do. But I think, the basic skills that you require is to basically understand, first of all, that regardless of what you are or who you are, when you're trying to work for an agency, is that you are a commercial artist or a commercial individual. And I would urge any freelancer to put that up on their laptop before they go and talk to an agency, to consider yourself to be a commercial artist. Now, whether you're a copywriter, or whether you're a graphic artist, or whether you're an illustrator, or an animator, or indeed a digital architect or a Flash developer, you've got to put that focus in your mind. But yeah, we're all changing. We're all having to learn about technology. I mean, the pandemic has forced us to up our game in that regard. But I do think it's more, agencies can be very reactive as opposed to proactive, and that's a bit of a shame, but that's just the way it is.
Alan, any observations on the kind of skill set has that changed? Or
yeah, I think it is, because again, the period of kind of diversification where you had your media shop and your digital shop and PR and everything was segmented. Like when we all started in the business, there was it was full service, and it's kind of come again around to that, where everybody, and digital probably brought that, so everybody wanted a piece of kind of the digital market. So look, in terms of the specific skill sets, I think just what I've seen even in the last 9 months is that very thing is that if there's change come the end of the pandemic subsidies, it'll be a recognition that certain people's, they just don't fit the model anymore, that their skill sets are too traditional, or they're too one-dimensional, and that what agencies will look to do is bring people in who are ambidextrous. And so I think what we can see is there may not be a huge reduction in the absolute numbers working in the agency structure, but actually just the profile will be different. Some people will move out and some people will move back in. So, I mean, I wouldn't have as maybe a good a view on the specific skill sets particularly within the creative end, but certainly what I see is a demand for just ambidextrous people. And just, tech changes so quickly that, you mentioned Flash. It's not Flash anymore, it's something else. You've got a skill in something else. So I'd see a certain amount of rotation, certainly of roles.
I tuned into a session yesterday that IAPI put on with the great John Fanning. We all know John, and probably still one of the best brand ad people that the business has ever come across. But John was asked that question by Margaret Gilson from Boys and Girls, but she was asking about the skills that he believed that talent needed to get hired nowadays. And he said it basically came down to, he said, agencies and freelancers, people don't necessarily hire agencies or freelancers because they do the best work. They hire them because they like them and they believe that they can work with them to create greater work. So, in some cases you may, and we all know this from pitching, that you may have done the best pitch in the world, but if the client doesn't like you, then you're not going to get the business. And I think that equally applies in the case of independent talent. If you're going to an agency, you have a brilliant portfolio, I think that likability and the understanding of a client's business is really, really important. And again, it was something that John said as well, that people have to have a point of view in relation to maybe the agency, the work that they do, the brands that they might be working on, because what people don't want is just people to show up. There's loads of people who can show up, but they need people who will engage, who have a point of view, who maybe talk the language of commerce as well, that they're in there to do a job that's going to deliver for the agency and clearly deliver for the client. Any view on that, Gary?
Yeah, I think we all work in marketing of sorts, and and advertising is a function of marketing, and we're all talking about brands, but I think we're always great. This is sometimes a case of physician, heal thyself. First of all, a brand, well, you're all brands. All the freelancers out there are brands. Okay. So when you ask yourself, what is a brand? Well, to me, a brand is very simple. A brand is a promise. And each freelancer is a brand, and they need to deliver on their promise. And I think it's a really interesting point. Make someone like you today. Because we tend to do business with people they like. Now, we like people for lots of reasons. One of the reasons we like them is they're bloody good as well. But I think this analogy is good stories happen to people who tell them. And in my view, if a freelancers of any shade, color, creed, whatever it is you do, you've got to start telling stories about yourself. And not enough of you do that. And if you look at the way work tends to work for freelancers, it's a boom and bust situation. You're really, really busy, and then all of a sudden, that tap is turned off, and you go, "I've no work." And the reason you've no work is you've spent so much time being busy, functioning on one particular client, that you haven't gone out there and communicated with other potential pieces of work. And that constantly happens. I get calls. Well, I used to get calls back in the day. Hi, Gary. Listen, any work? And I said, well, I haven't heard from you in 9 months. I know I've been really busy working with Rocco. I go, that makes me very happy. Well done. What's that got to do with me? And what I'm saying is, if you're busy with one particular client, you've got to keep getting out, communicating with other people, telling people the story about you, about the work you're doing, being relevant, being interesting. Showing up is important, but showing up with a point of view. I am fed up and I get irritated when I go to a meeting or you go to a pitch and there's 8 people in the room and 4 people speak and the other 4 people don't say anything. I'm straight away wondering, why are you here? What are you doing? How much are you costing me being here? Have a point of view. Having a point of view also means you've got to do your research. Prepare yourself. Know the agency you're talking to. Do a bit of research on the client. Know a bit about the products and services that they're offering. That way you will be armed with being able to ask questions that actually show people that you care about what you're doing. And it's a bit like, you know, you've been given 6 hours to cut down a tree. Well, spend the first 2 hours sharpening your axe. That means asking proper questions, making sure you understand. Not enough freelancers pay enough attention to the research of the agency that they're going to work for and the client, potential client or clients that's on the agency's roster. And I think it is about that. Good stories happen to people who tell them. You've got to communicate about what you do on a regular basis to the potential different target audiences you might have that are going to give you work. Focusing on one agency and being busy for one agency 9 months will mean that at the end of that, you'll have no work. The indie list is going to be a great help, but if you're going to sit back and go, well, I've just signed up for the indie list, that's it now, I don't have to worry. That's not going to work either. You've got to get out there. You've got to shake the bushes. You've got to keep throwing bread on the water. You've all of those stupid analogies, but you've got to do that. Otherwise, work will just seize up. And it's a bit, I spoke to this earlier, you know, it's a bit like that you know, you never know the Pope is sick until he's dead. You know, we never hear about sick popes, just hear about them dying. And it's the same with why people go out of business slowly, then quickly. So what you have to do is you've got to make sure that you're constantly out there reminding people that you're available and what you can do. It doesn't matter, because you know what? Agencies don't care how busy you are working on other agencies.
There's a good point here, and it was one that I was going to bring up later on. And look, we all know the limitations of Zoom, and there's in the past, maybe it's been easier for people to be able to network with contacts that they've had in agencies. You know, meet them for a coffee, have a bit of lunch, whatever it might be. Now you kind of have to make a point, look for an appointment, turn it into a Zoom presentation or something like this. And I think it's become much more difficult for freelance people particularly to try and break into that kind of network now, even their old networks, because people, you know, everybody's working from home. You know, you need to have an appointment. You need to have a purpose going on a call. You can't just have a casual coffee with somebody that you haven't spoken to in a couple of months. Any views on that, guys, in terms of how, if you're working from home as a freelancer, how do you overcome that thing with you know, making yourself aware, putting yourself in danger of at least being contacted by an agency?
I'll try and just rub it. First of all, you've hit the nail on the head. People are working from home, okay? More and more. Contact them at home. I can't understand why direct marketing is not being used more during this pandemic. Targeted direct marketing. Find out where these people live. I mean, when is if you're going to ask me my address, what my address is, I'll give it to you once you tell me what you're going to do. If you're going to say, Gary, I want to write to you, I want to tell you about me, I want to tell you about my work, I'll never turn anybody down. But not enough people do that. I can't believe that why people are not using direct marketing more. Now, okay, I'm a great fan of direct marketing, but think about it. People are at home. There's a perfect way, there's a perfect route to people. Find out their address. Tell them the reason why you're asking them their address. Very few people will turn you down, and communicate with them that way in an interesting way. It doesn't matter how many people often ask me, how many times should I communicate with people? I'd say as many times as you like, as long as you've got something interesting to say.
That sounds like the Liam Neeson approach. I know where you live. I'll find you.
Well, it might sound like that, but it's not, because, you know, I've never refused anybody my address once they tell me what it is they're going to do. And if they're going to send me stuff that's going to be interesting and about them, I think the vast majority of people, you know what, junk mail is junk mail because it's not targeted and it's not interesting. If it's targeted and interesting, it becomes relevant.
But I think
Look,
I think
we've all
also,
seen
Peter,
great DM over the years that really stands out if it lands on your door, lands on your inbox, whatever it might be. And I suppose it is a great opportunity from a particularly any creative's point of view to use that as a way to open that Zoom door for them.
And Peter, these times will pass. So, we are in this kind of bullseye of the storm, or whatever analogy you want. And it is difficult. I can imagine how difficult it is. But it'll pass. The time will pass. And actually, creative agencies in particular, I mean, Zoom is fine because you've no alternative. But we will go back to collaboration and grabbing 3 or 4 people together to work out an idea, or work out a business problem and solve it. And I think the more you spend time on Zoom, you clamor for those old times again. So I think we'll end up with a hybrid approach, and that should lend itself very much to being a freelancer as well, because you can see that you can the ability to work from your desk at home. Employers now trust that. They trust the people who are working for them to be able to do that when they're out of sight. So I think it is a tough time now, but actually focus on how you behave when the good times come back again. And just to go back to that earlier question about how you make a difference, and to add to Gary's point about commerciality, is that on average, if you take what an average agency will charge 100 grand a year per their employee, right? That's just a rough guide. And they'll spend 60 to 65 of that on staff, and they'll spend 20 to 25 of that on overheads, and they hope they'll make 10, maybe 20 if they're really lucky. So it's not in the hundreds of thousands. It's 100 grand per employee is roughly the amount. And actually, it also is a nice simulate, because agencies in general charge about 100 quid an hour. Okay. So there's not a huge margin in there. So the point about commerciality is a really important one. If you go into an agency and they're not ready for you, you're waiting, you're sitting there, you're waiting for briefs, you're probably happy, you're getting paid because you've agreed a rate for a week. But actually, you're not helping the agency make money in that particular week. So when someone like me as a finance director comes back and looks at the debit and the credit side and says, hold on, we're losing money here on freelancers. And I know when you go in, you feel it's the creative agency's job to run it efficiently and profitably. But as we know, agencies sometimes aren't great at that, particularly if you're being briefed by, if the finance thing is not being discussed by your account director, your creative director. Someone like me might look at it, but what I'd say to you when you're in there is make sure there's a return on the investment that they're putting in you. Make sure that, like, not all agencies look for a timesheet from a freelancer or breakdown of where they spent their time that week. I'd be pissed off if I was in there and I was sitting around waiting for briefs or I was working on stuff that had no final point. I'd want to make a return on behalf of the agency. And people like me sitting in a finance seat will look and say, hold on, there's somebody and we took them in at X and we built them out at 2X. And that becomes then a commercial model that Gary is talking about.
Talk to me, Alan, just on that point, because what we've found in the experience that we've had, myself and Una, talking to people and looking at some of the information, obviously, they give us, which we treat in confidence clearly, but the range of pricing that goes on in particular disciplines, and clearly some of it is based on the levels of experience that people have. People who are new into a particular category are obviously charging less than somebody who's 16 years experience as a freelancer. But even some of the most experienced freelancers that we've spoken to have said that it's very, very difficult to command the price that they used to get. Now, I'm not talking pre-COVID. I'm talking almost kind of 5 years ago. Some of them are working on rates that are less than what was the going rate then. And, I suppose there's a fear in certain categories of freelancing that it is a race to the bottom, that there's pressure clearly on agencies from clients and then for agencies onto freelancers as well. But, is there any advice that you can give people who feel that look, the pressure's on? Every time I go for a job, I'd lose out because the price is never low enough or cost effective enough,
And the best guy in my time in II, the best guy we had, third party, who came in, and he'd come into the agency before we ring and say, we want to get a bit of work done. He'd come in beforehand, before I find out, right, what's the brief? Is there brief proper? What's the scope? He'd agree a price in advance, and the day he showed up, and then he'd say, "Do the creative know I'm coming? Do the client service know I'm coming?" Absolutely. Are they ready for me on Monday? Yes, they are. And he'd come in and then he'd start painting. And it was Austin Murray, our painter decorator. But his rule was, have I got all those things lined up before I start? Because if I don't, I look poor. So he went on the basis of, he said, look, he went on reliability, trust, and value. And value is a probably it's a triangle between quality, price, becomes value. And so lots of agencies will say to you, what's your pitch rate? Okay. And you should resist that, because the person who's asking you doesn't have a pitch salary rate. He's not taking a pay cut for the month while he's working on a pitch. So you may decide, say, look, I'll do 20 hours at X. Okay. You do 20 hours and I'll give you that rate. But once you go beyond that, I'm back up to normal rates. The biggest protection, I think, is to go back to that return on investment. Make sure that you're being productive while you're there. Actually, in the UK, I don't know how prevalent the model is here, but in the UK, a lot of freelancers only get paid. They don't get paid for sitting there waiting for a brief. They only get paid for work that actually ends up getting logged onto a job. You know,
we're seeing that with a lot of the international platforms, the bigger ones, but in our view, and Una's kind of phrase, we're kind of low tech and high touch, that we're not, the last thing that the market needs, the last thing that we want to see is talent is treated as a commodity. And I think a lot of the big international platforms, and look, we've only kind of learned this game over the last 7 months, but a lot of the big ones do treat talent as a bit of a commodity. It's kind of, you want your logo designed for €50 or a bit of artwork or a bit of UX work done, then, this lad will do it for you, or whoever, And I don't think it's in anybody's interest that we go down that route, because look, it's a relatively small market. People generally know each other by, if not directly, but certainly by one remove. And we're all, like, the purpose of the indie list, we make no bones about it, is try and get as many people working in the industry as possible. And, it's for the interests of both clearly ourselves, but also freelancers, agencies, and clients and marketing departments. If we don't have a sustainable industry locally with people who are earning decent amounts of money, we're not talking about, back in the bygone age, but a decent amount of money where people can have that decent standard of living, getting reasonably well paid for the work that they do, then look, we may as well throw the hat at it. But, it's certainly not in anybody's interest that we go down to, reduce the prices down to a level that nobody can make any money out of it. And we know agencies need to make money. We know clients need to, see value for their budgets and so on. Yeah. Gary, you look as if you have a view there. Yeah.
I think to be fair to agencies, they're struggling big time with margins as well. And a lot of it is their own fault. Collectively, we have people in the agency business, and I include myself in this, have allowed ourselves. We've been the frog in the boiling water. We've allowed this to happen, and the big bugbear for me has always been this blended rate. And when you blend, you bland, because that's what blending does. And unfortunately, it has driven down rates. And that's probably been reflected in how agencies approach some freelancers. However, in all of my time presenting and pitching, I have never ever heard an agency said to me, "Well, we decided to," or a client said, "We decided to give it to the cheapest agency." I've never ever come across that. Now, what they'll probably do is they'll probably go back and renegotiate with the agency they think is the best. So sometimes, as a freelancer, you have to get through it, and it is the old, brilliant, cheap, and quick. You can only have two of those. Which two do you want? And the two that you pick, the other one's going to be sacrificed. If it's brilliant and cheap, well, it's not going to be quick. It's going to take me a long time to figure that out. If it's brilliant and quick, then it's not going to be cheap. So it's making sure that you stand up for yourself. And you do have to, because I've never, in my experience, appointed a freelancer because he or she were the cheapest. Never.
Just a shout out maybe to the audience. If you have any questions along the way, I'm happy to put them to the guides on your behalf. So don't be afraid to post something in the box, either with your name or anonymously as well. Yeah, Gary. Yeah, sorry.
There that Alan touched on, and in my experience in the agency business in the last certainly 7 to 8 years, what we've become really bad at is managing time. managing time. And that's really ironic, because it's the only thing we can actually charge for is time. And, you know, endless 10 people at a meeting when only 3 people speak, meetings going on for hours and hours, presentations going on for hours and hours. I mean, I always believe in this, you know, and I would ask that I just like to get things done quickly, and I don't like hanging around and messing around. You know, think of the 3 B's: be brief, be brilliant, and be off. And that's what I really believe in. When you're a freelancer, get in there. You know, okay, and even at a pitch situation where an Una would notice, well, you've got an hour and a half to present. I always say to our crew, don't take the hour and a half. You know, get in there and be as concise and as brilliant as you possibly can. That particular client does not really want to sit in that room for an hour and a half with you spending the first half hour going over the brief. And let's go through the brief. Well, I've already written the brief. You don't need to go through with me again. Get to the point, be brief, be brilliant, and be off. And that's what commercialization. And if you look at what I'm saying is, you need to be a commercial artist in our business, in the advertising marketing business. True innovation, true creativity is the commercialization of an idea. Okay, true creativity in advertising, true innovation in advertising is the commercialization of an idea. So how can you, as a freelancer, how can you bring that idea? How can you help the agency commercialize that for the client? That's the real challenge. And if you can do that, you'll be, and remember, marketing, we're in the world of marketing. Marketing is about making selling easier. So what can you do to try and help make selling easier for the agency or for the brand? Make it quicker, make it cheaper in some cases, make it more accessible, make it easier to buy. They're the challenges you need to be looking at. But again, be brief, be brilliant, and be off.
There's a couple of questions coming in here, and one in particular, Gary, which, well, either yourself or Alan might have a view on. Do you see a situation where agencies will be charging for outcomes or outputs? So rather than this thing that's kind of time dependent or body of work or whatever, but it's the outcomes or the outputs. And if so, what are the implications for freelancers as a follow on from that?
There was a view going back over a few years when data became, you know, it was going to be the big thing. It's all about data and tracking people's behavior and their expenditure and where their eyeballs were, etc. And that agencies would adopt those models because based on the work that they had and the efficiency it was in terms of converting into sales, to take Gary's point, which is the whole aim. But I mean, certainly my experience is that clients themselves haven't helped in that because they're reluctant to maybe GDPR or whatever it is to actually release the data that will help inform the agency. So there's kind of a bit of a gap there, and hence, whereas, you know, it might work for agencies to work more of that model, Peter, that hasn't really advanced to the level that we would have expected maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The one thing about getting paid for outputs from a freelancer's perspective, I would always advise a freelancer, particularly if you're doing a favor for somebody in relation to a pitch or a piece of work that's been presented. If there's a squeeze on your time or on your rate, make sure that if that project is sold or a client is won, that you have come back for whatever balance that you've left behind. Don't give it away and walk away. Just make sure you argue your point that if it's successful for you, it's successful for me. And I don't think, you know, like I probably would have been in a position where I'm trying to negotiate freelancers down on projects. But anybody who said to me, look, if you win this piece of business, are you happy to pay me a success fee? And I always was, because it was, again, the return on investment. You help us win something, you get paid, because you become an investment rather than a cost. And I think that's a good mindset to have. Again, you know, commercial artists, but your objective is to help the agency make money, because if they make money,
sure. There's a point here from Lynn Tracy, and I think Lynn makes a really valid point, and we've kind of all come across it, but she says, to my mind, a huge issue is that as an industry, we've commodified our skills. How can we move the industry back to a value model? Charging for time puts a limit on our ability to create brilliant and effective communications? Thanks for that, Lynn.
Well, I think if you go back to the question you asked originally, you could probably relate that question from Lynn into that. I mean, I would love if more and more brands and clients wanted to pay for outcomes rather than outputs. But you know what? They're afraid. They're actually afraid. And I have in the past gone in and said, listen, listen, all I'm looking for here is a percentage of the margin on some of these products. And let's work from there. We're prepared to put our neck on the line. And you know what? You get the business, but you don't get the business that you don't get the business based on the outcome. You get the business because you've shown a belief in yourself. Because they're afraid. They're afraid that they're actually going to that you might make too much money out of it. But I mean, we have, back to Lynn's point, we have commoditized our business. I'm not sure. A lot of that has been because if you go back to about, okay, when we started off, we never heard of the procurement people. Okay, procurement people kept away from creativity because they didn't understand it. And then in the last 20 years, the procurement people began to say, oh, there's a little, we're not really over advertising and marketing. Let's get involved in that. And since they came in, they have probably helped usually driven down costs. And I remember having these bizarre conversations with people from procurement. Now, what's a concept exactly, Gary? And like, what's the difference between a big concept and a little concept? And I'd say, there's no fucking difference, right? You know, and what's the difference between a blue sky idea and a grey sky idea? I said, well, I've never heard of a grey sky idea in the first place. So, you know, we need to wrestle that back. And we have not been brave enough. Agencies have not been brave enough. Agencies have not been brave enough to stand up and say no. Well, not you know, some have. And, you know, just even say, well, look, even the pitch processes now has got ridiculous where you'd have up to 10 agencies sometimes pitching. That's ridiculous. But
I know. I happy have tried to, you know, they've worked on pitch guidelines and their new ones are just out as well. And Una would have her own kind of scars from pitching over the years or managing pitches. There's a question here from Paul Collins, and Paul is asking, particularly from maybe Gary or again Alan, who generally is the best person to reach out to in agencies that you haven't worked with before? So, you know, that's clearly going to vary depending on the type of service that you're trying to offer. But generally, is there a set of individuals? Is there one individual who you're better cozying up to or making contact with?
I think I mean, it depends on your discipline as well. And you know, obviously, I think you follow your discipline. If you're in creative side, you'll target the creative director, and planning, you'll find the planning director. I mean, you know, there tends not to be in an agency a head of recruitment, or it's not the finance director. It's your particular discipline, I think, is the route to follow. What do you think, Gary?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it down to one. I think a little trick to do sometimes is, you know, people in agencies are very jealous and are very protective of their own career. So if you could line up 3 or 4 people and contact them, and by the way, tell all 4 of them that you've contacted the other people as well, because if you've got a good idea, they'll all want it. And they'll all become, oh, I can't believe that, you know. So I wouldn't focus on one particular person. Obviously, the creative director, maybe the account director as well. Find out, first of all, who the client is. You know, maybe even go sometimes and let them know you've got a really great idea pertaining to a particular brand, particular client, and contact the account director involved and maybe the creative director or even the managing director. But let them know you've contacted the other people as well, because that goes, oh, I better do something about that because Peter's had to get in this bloody thing as well, so I better do something about it.
Just on that subject of ideas, again, there's a question here from Judith, and she says, so you've created work for an agency. Can you publicly showcase it, or do agencies get cross? Do they want to keep credit in-house? So it's just that protocol between work that you've done on behalf of an agency. And clearly, look, we know there's a lot of brilliant work that, you know, agencies have done, but freelancers have contributed quite a large part of the work that gets awarded or wins a piece of business or whatever. Any advice that you can give to freelancers in that regard?
I think it depends on the agreement you have with the agency. First of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, the downside of being a freelancer is you never get credit for all the great work you've done it. And in fact, produced, and say you had an input into it, I certainly wouldn't have a problem with that myself.
I think agencies aren't too bad sometimes, at awards to credit freelancers where they've been involved. And if you look at production companies themselves, a production company will showcase the agency, the work that they've been involved on, on a TV campaign, and nobody bats an eyelid. And I don't see it shouldn't be any different from freelancers. But a question popped up there about, because we're kind of at the moment talking a lot about freelancers being seconded into an agency and then work done for a client. I think somebody asked the question there about, that it seems to be a more rewarding experience to go directly to a client. And I guess, that's an industry issue, and it's an issue for the indie list as well, as to how you manage that relationship between freelance client and agency sitting in the middle. But I think somebody suggested that it's a far better experience when you go directly to a client.
Look, I mean, the agencies certainly from our experience are still delivering about 50%, 60% of the work that we're seeing coming through for certainly our talent base. And clearly they represent a lot of clients. And look, freelancers clearly have to have their own clients. As Gary said, the indie list alone is not going to deliver enough work for everybody on the list. We've 460 people now, and we've been happy with the rate so far. Look, obviously we could do it more. We've had 80 projects, so we've had about, 15, 16% of our total base that we've managed to find work for, which is well above the average, we're told, from an international point of view. But it's, every good freelancer knows that you have to have a range of sources of work. There's a question here, and I know it comes from somebody who's not coming from the agency world, but a really good creative person and lots of brilliant ideas, brilliant portfolio work. But how do you make a break into the agency world when you don't have that kind of natural network? Is there any advice that you might be able to give somebody like that?
Well, you have to do what you have to do. It's a bit like, when on the agency side and you want to get business, you have to go out and try and meet people and get in front of them. Now, I know it's more difficult now, but I mean, again, I go back to targeted direct marketing. Try that. But you do have to do some, desperate men, desperate women do desperate things, and I've had to go out of my way and bump into people and meet them and say, look, this is what I am. This is what we do. Give us a chance. Give us a chance to prove our work. Let me work on something for free and see if I can deliver the results. Give me a specific brief. My one was always be, listen, give us the hardest brief you have. Give us what's your most difficult challenge? What's the most difficult challenge you have as a brand? What's the most difficult challenge you have as a company? Give me a go at that. I don't want an easy one. I want a really difficult one. Give me the freedom of a tight brief. And that's really, give me something that's really tight and let me show you how good I am. That's the type of attitude you have to adopt, and it is an attitude. And, I have a question. I have a question for the people that are on here, the freelancers, and ask them, when is the last time you actually contacted someone? You actually made a cold contact to somebody to try and generate business? I'd really like to know, because I can tell you.
We've had one from Sabrina yesterday, a few days ago, another one. So, clearly there's people knocking on doors on a regular basis, but unfortunately the door has not been answered. There's a question, Gary, here. You talked about the story or whatever that people need to tell, but is there an example of the best way a freelancer has ever gotten in touch with you, and did you hire them as a result of that?
Yeah, there have been. I mean, I've got some interesting pieces. I mean, I've been a great fan of direct mail, so I've got some really. You know what, brilliant. You can't beat a well-written addressed letter. When's the last time you received a really well-written letter to you? Now, I might think that's old school, but you know what? It's coming back. If somebody writes you a really well-written letter, that can work. I have people have come up to me and challenged me in pubs and saying, I'd like to work for you. I think I'm great. You give them a chance. But it's really about them delivering work. I mean, and seeing work that they deliver for other agencies, and it is about, really just keep at it, keep in front. I mean, okay, I'm seeing messages. Last month, I contacted someone. That's great. Well done. Knock yourself out. There's another month next month, and the one after, and the one after. Keep it up. It's not just going to fall in your lap. Listen, it's not easy. It mightn't work. It takes effort. You know, it takes
Somebody
effort.
said, Gary, your postman is going to be busy after this call.
I can tell you, he's busy already. I've got three daughters going to college here. He's very busy.
A question from somebody who's freelancing in the communications and PR area, because, you know, clearly maybe some of our conversation is biased or heavily biased towards kind of creative people and working for agencies. But would agencies collaborate, do you think, with freelancers in communications and PR, or are the freelance opportunities and creatives primarily for creatives? Certainly our experience. So just for us to answer that, a lot of the requests that we get are not just advertising creative people by agencies. It tends to be project managers, account managers, people who can help them with planning, particularly the medium to small agencies who don't necessarily have that resource sitting around. But this is specifically around the area of PR and customer communications. Any advice there?
I think again, you know, like PR is a division of marketing. You know, it's just one more kind of pillar within all the pillars that we have. And again, if you think about what a PR agency might want, or an ad agency or market, whatever it might be, again, come back to being relevant, being good, being reliable, being value, and being trustworthy. And you know, what people are looking for, and certainly on the creative side, is really good content. It doesn't, like, I wouldn't see any barrier whatsoever on what's over what title is over someone's door, be it PR or agency. I don't see that as a barrier. I think it comes back to the selling point. I mean, Una shared a piece on, or it was a piece on LinkedIn. It was a piece of animation that someone popped up on LinkedIn, very kind of creative piece, and somebody developed it. It was, you know, wasn't any brief, just a little bit of work. They populated on LinkedIn and got great traction. And, you know, whether that guy got work out of it, I'd say he did, but he just found where his audience were. He pursued them and he gave them something relevant to look at. And I think, you know, not everybody is an animator, but you find your target market, and then you think about your way to get to them.
I'm very conscious of time now. We've about 6 minutes left. I'm going to maybe ask both of you just to leave with some final kind of wrap-up advice for the various freelancers that we have on the call today. Alan, might ask you, you've touched on a few things there at the end, but is there maybe 3 things that you'd say to the freelance talent that we have here on?
I'd say, I think the first thing is you're a business. It doesn't matter whether you're a limited company or a sole trader, it doesn't matter, but you and yourself, by nature, you're a business, and then adopt the persona of a business for yourself. And that is, you have to make money, you have to make a margin. So dive into the bottom just to get in, or you know, I often hear a phrase, and Alan, we're not charging for that, we're investing in the brand. There's no such thing. You invest with productive work. So what I would say is the commerciality of it. Absolutely. And when you get in there, you just make sure that the work you do when you're in the agency or with your client is profitable for them as best you can. You might think it's not your responsibility, but it very much is. And then you'll work out maybe why you're getting called back the next time. Because if you can go in, do a job and earn money for the agency or the client, you're an investment. The agency going to get a return. So I'd focus on that. You're a business. We haven't touched on it. I think the one thing, Peter, I'd say for people working is that there are a lot of freelancers don't often know, but there are a lot of overheads that you incur day to day that you don't claim as a freelancer. That just, you know, ultimately your money at the end of the year is your gross less your tax. And And I think maybe we do another session or a chat about that.
Yeah, I didn't purposely get into it because I'm, again, conscious of time, but I know you're not a tax advisor, but yeah, there are regular questions from people as to what they can claim as freelancers. So again, we might come back to that in a separate one.
Huge amount.
Yeah. Gary, I'm going to ask you to maybe wrap up with a bit of advice again for freelancers.
I'm just thinking there, you asked me about somebody that a freelancer did one time. Yeah, a freelancer once sent me a jar of coffee one time for all the coffee he was going to be drinking in my agency, all the free coffee he was going to get if I gave him some work, which I thought was cheeky but interesting. But anyway, I'm going to say, first of all, good stories happen to those who tell them. So you've got to keep telling people about your story and how good you are and what you do and how relevant you are. That's the first thing. The second thing is consider yourself to be a commercial artist, as Alan has already touched upon. Show up and have a point of view. Make sure that you read the brief. Make sure you interrogate the brief. Make sure you ask intelligent questions about the brief. Remember the 3 B's: be brief, be brilliant, and be off. Okay, present concisely, quickly, and get to the point. But make sure you interrogate the brief. And remember, okay, answer the brief. How many creative directors does it take? How many freelancers does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is, does it have to be a light bulb? Yes, it does have to be a light bulb. And the corollary of that is how many account directors does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, I'll get back to you on that. So if they're going to waste your time, don't let them, but don't waste their time.
Good. Okay, I only asked for 3 things, Gary, but anyway, in typical fashion.
Hey.
Again, I'm really conscious of the time. 2 minutes maybe to try and, I'm not going to try and summarize all of that because some really good stuff there, and it will be in the recording later on. But just a couple of the things that Una and I have picked up over the course of the 7 months or so, the indie list. I mean, what we're seeing from agencies or hearing from agencies, seeing from clients, is that they're seeking help with projects that are short-term and also long-term. They're looking for people who can contribute on a tactical basis, but also on a strategic basis as well. And I know one of the comments here is that, you know, freelancers are often brought in as impact subs, and that's probably a good way of maybe describing certain types of contributions. But they're looking for specialized talent, but they're also looking for general talent as well. So people who can manage internal teams, but also manage the clients. And that's a really, we can't get enough of people who are really good project managers, account managers. And what we're seeing is that in an environment and in I suppose an age where there's ongoing uncertainty, employers, we think, are even more attracted to the freelance option for a variety of reasons. It makes hiring easier for hard to fill jobs. It offers access to a wider set of skills. And also it's helping them and helping agencies to control headcount and payroll costs, because it allows more flexibility during times of change. So they can scale up and scale down. And there's 4 messages that we're giving to agencies and to clients. And we've done a lot of presentations since the beginning of the year and at the tail end of last year. Again, just spreading the word about the freelance community that we now have. And the first one is that we have people who are very, very capable, people who will bring their A game every time. Now, that's a big promise to make on everybody's behalf, but that's what clients are expecting, agencies are expecting. You bring people along who are going to bring their A game, and not necessarily every one of their workforce can claim that every day of the week, but freelancers have to do that, have to bring their A game. They have to challenge. Gary has talked about it, challenging a brief, fine up to a point, but a lot of work presumably has gone into writing that brief, but people who will offer a different point of view and a different perspective. The third one is commerciality again, and both of the guys have touched on this, that people who understand the commercial imperatives attached to being hired and attached to agency work, that you're there to do a job that's going to deliver a result for the agency, a result for the client that they're going to charge for, and they're going to charge out your time. And the final point is collaboration, that, you know, people who are passionate about working with clients rather than just working for clients, because sometimes it's about, oh, look, it's just another job, but everybody wants to get repeat business by and large from agencies or from clients. So the collaboration thing is really, really important. And the first of these sessions that we had, which is last August, which wasn't described as a learn over lunch session, but John Younger, who's the big authority on freelancing globally, he said freelancers need to hunt in packs. That, you know, working on your own is great up to a point, but sometimes you need to work together with other freelancers in order to crack you know, getting work from agencies or getting work from particular clients. And I think that piece of advice is still absolutely valid, and no matter what part of the freelance world you're coming from. Again, 2 o'clock. In fact, it's a minute past 2. Sorry, Gary, you want to finish up with one last piece of word? Yeah.
I just want to end on one thing. First of all, you need to understand that and appreciate how important you are to the advertising business. Okay, you shouldn't consider yourself to be outsiders or outliers. You are a fundamental part of advertising and marketing in Ireland. So you're really important. You're a really important resource. And you know what? The amount of brilliant freelancers that I've come across in my day have been fantastic. And they're a joy to work with most times. You know why? Because freelancers tend to have interests outside of their work, and that makes them more interesting, and that makes them bring a nuanced view to work. So, you know, I've dealt with freelancers who are into music, they're into writing, they're into all sorts of different stuff. And that, having that little different interest makes you and your work and your output and the outcomes of your work interesting. So you're a very important resource for the marketing world, and you know, never forget that.
Okay, Gary, I'm going to end on that note. And again, I just want to thank both of you for giving us the time today. Lots of really brilliant advice, I think, for everybody who's been on the call. Great advice for us as well, because we're still learning. What we're going to try and do is a few more of these sessions. I know Gary has a few ideas around other pieces of advice. Alan has talked about maybe some tax advice, but we have a couple of other people. But we're very much open to suggestions from the community as to the type of topics, the type of speakers that they'd like to hear, and send it on the back of a self-addressed €50 note to myself or Una, and we'll certainly consider it over the course of the next week or two. So look, have a great day, guys. Mind yourselves. And in the words of Joe Duffy, wash your hands.